Writing her next book about, I guess, kind of a relevant topic, unbearable being pregnant in America. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And it's funny, we're actually, we talked about order and how we were going to do things, but everyone's sitting in the order that I wrote them, so we didn't plan that. So going down the line here, Shawnda Chapman is the Ms. Foundation for Women's Director of Innovative Grant Making and Research. Shawnda previously led a national initiative at the Vera Institute aimed at preventing and ending girls' incarceration. She also served as director of the Beyond the Bars Fellowship Program at the Center for Justice at Columbia University. She sits on the board of Black Women's Blueprint, a transnational organization that works to end all forms of violence against Black women and girls. Thank you so much for being here. And then Joanne Smith is the founding president and CEO of Girls for Gender Equity, a staunch human rights advocate. Smith co-chaired the nation's first Young Women's Initiative, a coordinated government, philanthropic, and community effort to create conditions for girls of color and trans and gender expansive youth to thrive. She is the co-founder of the Black Girl Freedom Fund and the 1 Billion for Black Girls, that's a hashtag, so it came out a little bit muddled out of my mouth, campaign, a 10-year initiative to invest $1 billion towards advancing Black girls. And she is a 2018 Women of Vision awardee from the Ms. Foundation. So it's all in the family here. This setup is strange here. I need to push back a little because I'm sitting here with my back to everybody here. Right, is that okay? Okay, so here's where we're going to start because Shawnda's holding 2 copies of this beautiful, slick magazine in her hand. We're going to start with the magazine. Somehow, in 1971 into 1972, a new story was born for the country in the form of Ms. Magazine, this magazine created by Gloria Steinem and so many other advocates and activists and writers who really wanted to bring to life the stories that weren't being told in a completely different medium. So I don't know that we're actually all about the same age. We shared a lot of details backstage, but not our ages. I'm 55. I know that the first time I picked up Ms. Magazine wasn't because anybody told me to or advised me to. I grew up very sort of apolitically. I was just like a suburban mall rat. And I found it in my public library. Shout out for public libraries. And I became lost. I was probably 13 or 14, I would say. It was my vacation, my laboratory, my everything. I would just go to the library and read Ms. Magazine. I think I started subscribing to it when I was a young adult and had funds of my own. But that's my story there. Take it away, folks. Who's going to tell their Ms. Magazine story?
I think I volunteered to be first.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and good evening, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here with these brilliant panelists. So I offered to tell the story, but I'm also a little bit embarrassed by my mini girl bossery at a young age, because the way that I first connected with Ms. is that in the 10th grade, I knew I wanted to be a journalist, and I didn't know anybody in journalism, and it was the very beginning of email, at least email addresses being commonly used. So I'm 40, so this was 2000, I think. Maybe it was 1999. I cold emailed a bunch of publications telling them that I was looking for somewhere to spend career day. And career day was a real thing, but it was a thing that I had made up because I wanted to, it existed because I, invented it at my small school. And the first people to contact me in response was the intern coordinator at Ms. And of course I had made this kind of shameless pitch like, you support young women, I am a young woman. And she said, yeah, come on over. So I spent career day there, and I just interviewed everybody about their career paths. And at the end of the day, I will never forget that there was a young Black woman who worked in marketing, and she talked to me, and she just said, you should come back here for the summer. And I ended up spending the summer there as an intern, and I was lucky because it was a moment in time where there was heightened awareness of the need to hear from young people. And I think they thought, okay, who knows who this 16-year-old is, but she's got the chutzpah to cold email us right now. And it was indeed a very open environment, but it was also an environment of financial chaos and instability, because shortly thereafter it turned out to be a rescue, but it was, I believe, in the following year that the Ms. Foundation purchased Ms. and they closed that New York office.
Majority Foundation.
Yes. The Feminist Majority Foundation, purchased Ms. Magazine. And I'll never forget seeing Woody Allen outside of the office on Exchange Place and coming upstairs and eagerly having news to tell everyone. And they're like, bring him here.
We know.
Yeah. But all of that is to say, and there's something else that I want to add to this. And because I was already kind of a baby feminist, but hearing from the women there and then reading the work that they had done, reading the magazine, was an important foundation of my feminism. But if I'm honest, what really lit a fire under my feminism were the message boards that MsMagazine.com hosted, and hardly even moderated, but had this incredibly active online community at a time where it was really embryonic, so to speak, in online communities. And there was a huge discussion about all forms of feminism, critiques of feminism, race, gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, even gender identity. And I ended up spending most of my senior year just kind of on these message boards. And I, to this day, feel that, I later became a journalist online first, that the internet opened that door, and Ms. was the foundation of opening that door for me.
Thank you for sharing that.
I love that story. I wish I had a story that matched that, but I don't remember my first. And I'm like, I really took Ms. Foundation or Ms. Magazine and the feminist majority at that time for granted, because I started Girls for Gender Equity in 2001. And at that time, about 2003, I was working with an organizer by the name of Mandy Van Dieven, who has done wonders in the world of philanthropy since. And she was a writer, she was a blogger, she was, the person to get GGE on blogs in 2008, 2006, to get the young folks in and writing. And I remember Ms. Magazine coming to our office regularly at that time, and us getting stacks, being able to give it away in our, youth bags, being able to celebrate the magazine. And it was something I took for granted as, this is what just happens. This is what is supposed to happen. This is, our, feminist encyclopedia. I remember for a long time keeping the 2012 issue of Wonder Woman on the cover. One, I had a crush on Wonder Woman when I was a little girl. I did paint her black.
On the issue, or when you were a little girl? Oh, amazing.
Oh, I didn't paint her black in real life. Like, Wonder Woman.
No, I was wondering if as a child or as an adult.
Yeah, no, as a child, I think I wanted to be Wonder Woman. I mean, I am a lesbian, so who knows? But I think I wanted to be, and I was just like, Wonder Woman, fine. And then seeing Wonder Woman on the magazine, I was just like, oh, that. I kept that cover. And then I remember, like, in 2012, like, coloring it. I think I was just doodling, coloring it black. And really, seeing then myself on the cover of Ms. Magazine in that issue. And, ever since, keeping the Obama issue, we had so many stacks of Ms. Magazines in the office. Our young people would make vision boards out of the magazine. They were topics of conversation. They were writing prompts that we would use. It just was a normal staple. It just felt like this is just what it's supposed to be.
Thank you for that.
Yay.
I also colored my people black in various shades of brown and burnt sienna.
That's right.
Because that was a thing too back then. So I do remember my first. Took me a while to get there, like many things in my life. It's an interesting thing, the sort of concept of seeing oneself, or the lack of seeing oneself, and what one does to get there. In the 10th grade, I was reading like Word Up. I was not reading Ms. Magazine, right? And so it's an interesting thing, because I would say that for me, feminism saved my life long before I had words to sort of name feminism as a thing. I didn't actually identify as a feminist until probably I was in my 30s. I was in school. I was intern at the Opportunity Agenda, and Janet Dewart-Bell, if you know her, was a fellow. And so I'd had a conversation in one of my classes, because I was going back to school then, and some folks were having a conversation about Nicki Minaj and the concept of, it's Barbie, bitch, feminism. And I was like, well, am I a feminist? What is, I don't know that I have ever seen myself there. And what I know of feminism seems to sometimes reject many of the things that are important to me and important to the communities that I love. And so I had this conversation, and I turned to Janet, who was seated behind me, and I was like, Janet, do you consider yourself a feminist? And she looked at me like I had 6 heads coming out of my neck. And she, and she was like, yes. And I didn't ask any more questions. I feverishly started to do my research. And one of the places that I sort of instantly started to find questions about and answers to what it meant to be a feminist were answers through articles at Ms. Magazine. And then I was instantly sort of able to sort of connect some of the literature that I'd read when I was a young person, like when I was a young person who was very much in trouble and people would give me books to read because in juvenile detention, you don't have other things to do. Mm-hmm. I would read The Bluest Eye, and I would read Why the Caged Bird Sings, and the lessons in those books started to come alive. And I was able to locate myself in a way that I hadn't before. And so all those things certainly started to crystallize and make sense for me, through reading, exploring. Eventually, I found my way to Ms. Foundation to come full circle and to really be able to support the people who don't often see themselves in spaces or in conversations like this one.
I'm kind of speechless right now. Those were all such beautiful and beautifully different answers. It makes me so honored to be on this stage and to be part of the story of feminism. And when you just said feminism saved my life, that really actually just sort of made me skip a beat there, because I think probably for all of us, to a very large extent, that's true, and it means something different to every person. And that's a bit of what we're going to talk about, we're going to jump into now. We have this sort of grand first question planned, but it actually doesn't seem so grand now. It seems like we're just going to all open our hearts here a little bit. But this was the grand question that I typed onto the list of questions for everybody. What is your definition of modern 21st century feminism? Just a light one. But seriously, at a moment where feminism is commodified, it's misunderstood, it's got its own baggage and historical problems. We just came off of the summer of Barbie, of Beyonce, of Taylor Swift. Like, feminism and images of feminism are everywhere. So I want all of us to actually dig in a little bit to the kinds of work we do. I think that's the place to start to answer this, not just this blue sky, what does my feminism mean to me? Mm-hmm. But we have right here on this stage, we have expert advocates, journalists, philanthropists, storytellers, activists. Dig into one of those and let's talk about, what does the future look like? How have the lessons we've learned going to propel us forward through all of those lenses and that kind of work? And I'm looking at you because you got this.
It's so funny. When we talked about it, it didn't seem like such a big question. And then you passed it to me and I was like, damn, this is a big question. I'll do my best. It's interesting because I don't worry as much about being mainstreamed, I think, as some might. As a matter of fact, I'm like, at this point, damn, give me the mainstream. Like, at least we'll have a starting point, right? Because there are so many times that, like I said, I have conversations with people who don't see themselves, sometimes people who are doing very feminist work, but the label doesn't necessarily translate to them. And so at this point, let's please mainstream, like, can we, basic women's gender studies starting in like the 2nd grade, like at least at a minimum, I'm thinking. But that said, and I think because we're amongst friends, and at this point we should know that, like, if your feminism ain't intersectional, it's raggedy as hell. I prepared a couple of things for us maybe to consider, probably just the one thing that I wrote. So for me, I'll say that modern feminism must inherently be speculative. It has to envision a future that really defies the oppressive structures and narratives that have been imposed on us. It has to reach back into the past, and it has to reclaim the legacies of those we stand on, those we've forgotten, and those we've left behind. And I think ultimately, to get to the liberation that we say we want, we're going to have to rely on the knowledge of people who have different ways of knowing this world, especially those who we were once willing to throw away, people with differing mental and physical abilities, poor people, fat people, queer folk, trans folk, formerly incarcerated people, and the list goes on. I think that a robust 21st century feminism doesn't shy away from the raw and unvarnished truth about our ongoing struggles. It really does have to be bold enough to tell the truth about the places that we as feminists have struggled in the past, places that we still struggle, and it has to be courageous enough to explore new ways of being, and especially from people who don't seem old enough to know anything about anything, and those who seem too old, like maybe me, to know anything about anything, remember anything about anything. I would say that, at this point, I'm sad that I have to say this, but I will. 21st century feminism rejects biological determinism, and it embraces expansive understandings of gender. It recognizes that feminism has to be inclusive and accommodating of the needs of transgender and non-binary and gender expansive people. And if it's not, that's certainly not a feminism that I want any parts of. It has queerness at its heart. Period. And if you don't understand that, see me after in the back. I'll walk you through the fine details.
That's so generous of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think not lastly, two more things. 21st century feminism acknowledges the interconnectedness with this planet, and it's driven by a commitment to environmental justice. It recognizes the global natures of our struggles, understanding that oppression is not confined by our borders. And lastly, a 21st century feminism, for me, is as committed to ending white supremacy as much as it is to patriarchy. And it's deeply rooted in abolitionist principles. It seeks to dismantle oppressive systems, including the prison industrial complex, recognizing that these structures perpetuate harm and disproportionately affect marginalized communities. And central to this feminism is its unwavering commitment to eradicating racial injustice. Okay.
What Shawnda said. I mean, thank you. Thank you for that framework. And I think Black feminism is a verb. It's a practice. It's a learning and unlearning. It's a trying and forgiving. It's a failing. It's a reach back, right? And a look to the past and a brought forward. It's resourced, right? It is being sure, as an intergenerational organization, my organization, Girls for Gender Equity, is intergenerational, and oftentimes, when I'm on the street and I wonder, who's looking out for that Black girl who's walking down the street? It's knowing that others are, without that question, that it doesn't always have to be me, right? Oftentimes we say, well, don't forget to say my name in the room, but who in the room, right, is looking out, for our youth, for our youth of color? It's disability justice, right? It's the act of being courageous enough. I hate to say it also, but to die for what you know is right. And very early on, I learned that about feminism, Black feminism, and what it means, to stand 10 toes down for what you believe. And at the same time, we're seeing it left and right now as people die, right? And women especially die. Trans folks die, are assassinated. And we understand that, as feminists, our responsibility is, oftentimes with what is easiest. And it's being able to name that my responsibility is actually with what is the hardest, what is not seen, what is not heard, and those are the dark places oftentimes we have to go, with the understanding that liberation is possible, with the understanding that we're towards the same horizon. I often tell our young people, we grow up together doing this work, right? And now at this age, they're like, and I'm like, all right, y'all grow up together doing this work, right? And they're like, that hits different. That hits different. I like that. Thank you for saying that, because now I understand it. And it's the reality that, like, Shawnda, I met doing this work in advocacy. Now Shawnda's in philanthropy. Shawnda could be the next president. Like, our horizon is shared. It doesn't matter. Oh, I didn't mean that, Ms. Foundation. That's no shade, Teresa. But you never know, and I meant politically, right? And that our horizon is shared, and that within that horizon, we understand that feminism and the act of feminism, the act of Black feminism, is centering race, centering class, centering, our young folks, centering disabled folks, and our lineages and indigenous practices, climate, et cetera, is a shared vision and a shared practice that we will fail and we will try again. That's feminism.
That was so beautiful that I'm just tempted to say ditto, but I also feel that part of feminism is a duty to fully engage with what you both just said. I'm going to badly paraphrase Melissa Harris Perry, and you sort of said this at the end too, where she gave her definition of feminism as asking what is not here or who is not here. And for me as a journalist, it's a very helpful guiding question. Which story is not being told? Who is already telling the story and isn't being heard? What are the ways in which all of these different experiences are interconnected rather than random? A case that you each made really eloquently. I think about also the human life cycle of, what did feminism mean when you're a girl who's seeking to be treated as fully human, whatever the specificity of your experience, versus, for example, somebody who's experiencing menopause and no longer meets the kind of societal prioritization of people with the ability to reproduce as being defined by that. And so for me also, as I move through my life, I guess I'm now middle-aged, I'm 40, is that what are the ways in which I can, you said reach back, what are the ways in which I can learn from the history of what women who are like me and who are not like me have experienced? What are the things that I can learn from young people? What are the ways in which we can make connections between our lived experiences and also ask questions about what it is that we haven't experienced? I'm thinking about what you said about people who were doing feminist work and who didn't identify with it. And it's so important, the way you highlighted the very real reasons not to call oneself a feminist or not to identify with the traditional feminist movement. I'm also thinking about people who don't call themselves feminists because it's inconvenient, unfashionable, unpopular, and it's so hard to remember it now when you have Barbie saying patriarchy a lot. But I was just thinking back to how when I was a freshman in college and I introduced myself at a dorm meeting as already getting a reputation for being a radical feminist and being okay with that, and the level of puzzlement, sexual harassment, bullying, rape threats, that I got in, it was like the year 2001, compared to what I see young people expanding and challenging the definitions of feminism and questioning institutions that I at the time was not questioning. So for somebody with the privileges that I have to say I'm a feminist as a challenge in whatever space I can, and to use whatever platform that I have as a journalist to tell stories or give platforms to other people's stories, is the way that I see the intersection of my feminism and my journalism, which is a really cool way to get to keep to talk to people and go to places who are doing the kind of amazing work that you each are doing.
All right, here's where I go off course. I want to pick up on that idea actually of platforms, right? Because you each come to the work from, I like the idea that we can be fluid in many ways, and we might be on one platform now and as an advocate, and then have access to different levers of power and influence as a philanthropist or different kinds of journalism. So I want to take all of the sort of truly grand things, actually, that you all said. I'm going to go back to the question whether it was grand or not. Those are grand responses, and put us back in this sort of questionable context that we live in right now, where we're seeing so many rollbacks on every single principle that was just discussed here that we all, I think, hold dear. Even in the work I do in menstruation and menopause, there's like this weird blowback happening right now where we're talking about periods as suddenly considered part of like a woke problem, and legislation is being rejected because it's part of some, it's thrown in the mix with all of the other isms that are I don't even know what the word is, that are being hijacked. But so we live in this real challenging time right now. How do you all see both the mistakes and missteps that have been made, whether in any community, feminism included, but also the platforms that you have now as part of the path forward? I don't think that's repetitive with the last question, but I actually really do want to hear about it from the work that you do every day right now. Sure. Can we try that? You get it? Is it working?
Sure.
It's a little bit different than what I had thought.
Sure. I think we'll figure it out as we talk about it. But when I think about the mistakes or what we can't afford to do is, and especially in thinking about Roe versus Wade, and thinking about all of the 568 trans bills that are on the table, 83 that have passed, 128 that are pending, 29 states that have incorporated them. I think we can't afford to leave anyone behind. I think we got to see during the Obama era, right? We thought, first Black president. I'll speak for myself, okay? So y'all don't have to be culpable in this. But first Black president, first gender and racial equity initiative, we fought that. We said we were, my brother's keeper. It can happen as my children's keeper. It has to include Black girls. It has to include youth of color. It has to include trans and gender expansive youth. And we thought, okay, didn't fully do it within Obama, but we'll do it with Hillary. And we got Trump. And this was our boulder up the hill. But we got to see how that boulder got stomped, and your boulder got stomped, and climate change boulder got stomped, and every boulder got stomped. And we got to see what decentralized organizing feels like. We can't ever go back to just a boulder, right? We have to pick up the pieces, whether it's that, right, ism, and we have to move forward. Now, what can't keep happening is the changing of the goalposts, right? And the understanding that is happening within our political landscape. We have to listen to the young folks, because at this moment, get out the vote isn't enough, right? Yes, we can is not going to do it. And there is so much promised that we're seeing get undermined, and I'm hearing a lot of hopelessness around. And so it's incredibly important right now for us to listen to the young folks, and beyond that, have young folks in positions of power to do something different without the expectation. Folks have the expectation of feminism to carry it forward and to do all the lifting, and for no one else to have to do anything. For as long as feminism is here, then why are you blaming anything else? Well, with young folks, it's they're here, and they're not allowed to blame us, and at the same time, we're not allowed to blame them. We have to collectively, intergenerationally, have young folks in positions of power, in places where their voices are heard, and resourced in ways to carry forward change. We cannot afford to wait for that to happen until they can vote, or until they're of an age where they're in, this kind of leadership position, until they have experienced everything. And then they can say, through my experience, this is what has happened. We have to leave room for that radical imagination, and we have to try some new things, because what we have been trying so far has gotten us here, and it's not enough, and it's not going to carry us there into the future. And so I think the practice of that is really hard. Intergenerational practice right now, I don't know about y'all in the workplace, but intergenerational practice of working together intergenerationally. There's a lot that we assume, but there's so much more we need to learn and hear. And it's very hard to hear And it's very hard to learn. It's very hard to feel hopeful when so many places of power are telling you no and oppressing the systems and the ways in which, you know, you walk through thresholds, right? And so you want to hear the yeses, but that is too a verb and a practice, right? To be able to trust each other, to be in a feminist space and a practice together, a Black feminist space and practice together of hearing, learning, unlearning, and doing. And so I think that practice of intergenerational work together is something that we can't afford to wait for. Like, it can't be an afterthought to have then youth be a part of something, right? That has to be actively engaged and nurtured. I think also the last thing I'll say before I pass it, within our work of advocacy, of leading organizations, of service delivery work with young folks, of, you know, moving the agenda forward, is infrastructure-wise, I think we do, before we have, you know, the solid infrastructure that we need. And I think so many times we don't think infrastructure is about wellness. I think that wellness is too much of an afterthought, too much of a factor that you have to earn wellness. And we're really unwell as a society right now. Like, we literally just came out of a global pandemic that right now, even folks have their mask on right now. I'm nervous. Right? Folks, disability justice told us this was going to happen. It happened. And we are literally like not learning from it in real time while it's still happening. And so wellness can't be that. Wellness can't be, you know, a matter of reacting. It has to be a proactive and expectation that we're going to be well. And especially right now when so much is saying from our nerves, from our mental health, from our physical health, from the institutions we're in, from the infrastructure, from the things that, you know, are coming down the pipelines, that we're not well, that we have to learn that that has to be something that we value right now and that we work on right now. Go ahead, jump in.
It's like you were, yes, clap for that. It's like you were in my brain a little bit.
What's that?
It's like you were in my brain.
Okay, let's talk about it.
I was like, oh wow, this is interesting. I think one of the reasons why I really love that in my position at Ms., I can support the leadership and the movement building of young people is because they question everything. And they see the connections to the various struggles. They reject the binaries. Those understandings of gender that we talked about, they have that now. And I hear that from them, and they're angry. And I think part of the reason we're experiencing some of this backlash is that the right knows that too, and they're afraid. And so,
well, the right is getting that from their youth, right?
Isn't that the truth?
Okay, go ahead.
But that wasn't my point. I just wanted to say, you know, that it really is a joy of mine to be able to support the work that you do and to support the people like you who do the work of sort of shepherding young people, you know, and sort of holding them while they develop these ideas and why they develop their identities and until they're ready, because they will be. And so that's one of the things that keeps me hopeful sort of in the work. But to your question, though, I was thinking a lot, and one of the things I didn't tell you guys is I'm a student. I'm a third-year PhD student at CUNY, and so I get to
say that.
Thank you for that. It's dragging me, so I appreciate all the claps. You know, I get to be parts of really wonderful conversations, and one of the things I do is I harass the people in my life who have done movement work to come and speak to my classes. If you're in here, thank you. If you're not, I might call you. And I had a conversation with Demeter Frazier, who many of you may know, one of the original authors of the writers from the Combahee Collective, and Kathy Boudin, who really wonderful soul, who was just really a pillar and anchor of movements to end incarceration, especially for women and girls. And who was also really active. She was a political prisoner who was, you know, active during the movements of the 60s and 70s. And I put them together for a conversation, and it was one of Kathy's last. I didn't know that it would be.
And she rest in peace.
Yeah, and one of the things that I asked them both was, what do you know today that you wish you'd known then? And just thinking about it sort of raises the hair. And she said, I could have never known the extent of the backlash. you know, and they talked about the ways that that moment was really pregnant with possibility, and that they were sort of on the precipice of this change, you know, at that moment. And they knew it was near, and they could taste it, but they couldn't ever anticipate the extent to which those who were sort of against justice and equality, the extent to which they would go to prevent it. And, you know, dare I say that we're like in another sort of inflection point similar to that, where we know that the activists who were working on reproductive freedoms had been ringing the alarms about Roe, like right up until the day before, I think, you know, but we didn't hear them, you know, and we didn't trust them, and we didn't respect their efforts. And for us now, you know, I think about the work that I do at the Ms. Foundation, and as a foundation that centers women and girls of color in our strategy and funding, we continue to hear from the activists that we work with that they have to do this work, you know, regardless of whether or not it's supported by donors, whether it's supported by the philanthropic sector. And we hear about how the people who are literally on the vanguard, who are like really crucial to the future of our democracy, that they don't get the support that they need to thrive. And as, you know, has been throughout history, it's true in this moment that especially Black and brown leaders are expected to do more with less. We did a report at Ms. in 2020 that found that total philanthropic giving to women and girls in color in the United States was $356 million in 2017. Which is about $5.48 per year for each woman and girl of color. And this accounts for about 1/2% of the total $66.9 billion given by foundations. Our most recent support focuses on the toll that working in under-resourced environments is having on women of color. And in short, we're burning them out at the moment we need them the most. So to your point about wellness, like we are literally running the people who are the first responders in our communities, our organizations, and our movements into the ground. So to land the plane, I'm just going to say that we need to hear, trust, and holistically support and fund the leaders who are at the front lines of movements.
So in thinking about backlash, I think back to, you talked about that boulder. I was actually thinking about sitting and actually on this stage. I told you as we were coming up that I had this wave of PTSD because I suddenly realized that I had been in this room 2 days after the 2016 election moderating a panel about eugenics. And it was a historically focused panel. And I don't think that we would have all agreed to do it if we thought Trump was going to win.
Right.
Because 2 days after the election, and everybody was absolutely shell-shocked. It turned into sort of group therapy. And also, again, thinking about history. And of course, there was tons of relevance to this panel about the history of eugenics, because it was emblematic of a moment of profound selling down the river, literally, profound selling out of certain people in the name of progress, in the name of supposed progress. And it's a cautionary tale. It's an ugly moment for the history of big F feminism. It's an ugly moment for progressivism. It's a moment in which
for philanthropy.
And for philanthropy, and for law, and for journalism, and for medicine. A hideous moment in history, I think, that we should think about when these things catch some people by surprise. What have we not learned about history? And so I personally have found it really helpful to think about the ways in which we've been here before. Without agreeing on what's happening, it's impossible to do anything. And so I also think about how in my industry, in journalism, the way that we covered, for example, abortion, which is something that I cover a lot, was always with this kind of the feminists are Chicken Little framework, or surely wealthy women will always be able to get abortions, or someone will be able to get an abortion, or the Republicans will never do it because then they'll never have an issue to run on. It may be that it has impaired them politically, but they really didn't care when they did it. And so I do think one of the things that the profound intensity and speed of the backlash did is that I remember also that there was a time where I used to, as a journalist and a commentator, decode the sexist and racist subtexts in things that elected officials said, and nobody needs that decoding. Like, they're literally standing up on stage calling people crossing the border rapists and banning Muslims and talking about grabbing by the pussy. I don't need to recite the litany for you. But there is no subtext there. And so I actually think, although it is definitely exhausting people, justifiably, this many years into it too, to have that so frontal, to have that so naked and undisguised, it is also clarifying. And you are seeing incredible mobilization because nobody can pretend that Republicans don't actually want abortion to be illegal, and that they won't actually put it into effect, and that they won't actually issue opinions like they did in the state of Alabama, saying that they're going to follow, they're going to prosecute and persecute people who assist abortion seekers to leave the state. And so the only good thing that I can say about backlash is, to some extent, it's ending the gaslighting, that this was not going to happen or that this was not the agenda. And I think the key is, to pick up on things that you both said, is how can you not burn out when it's so bad? You know, and for folks who are directly living it and not just engaging in it, how do they stay the course? You know, there's been, you know, this is your world, but there's been a lot of, I've been reading about people talking about how small donations are down in the progressive sphere, big donations are down in the progressive sphere. The specter of Trump not being what it was for some reason, even though he's probably going to get the nomination. I had somebody say to me yesterday, somebody who works in politics, like, oh, but, you know, after all these states pass these abortion rights referendums, is anybody going to keep caring about abortion? I was like, you don't think that they're going to keep trying to ban abortion everywhere anyway? But there is a legitimate question about people's focus staying. And so I think that the retrospective thing is, it gives nobody any pleasure to have been right about what the agenda was here all along, but at least it is clarifying. And so then the question of how to maintain any kind of focus and energy is an ongoing one, and one that I look to people like you two to kind of understand, because I know everybody in this room is tired.
Thank you for that. Well, let me thank you for that, and I think that that's the piece of it, of knowing that we all have that understanding, and then we all have that work to do. So when you think of, Jen, what you would have done different?
Oh, turning the question back. It's funny because I didn't even prepare an answer, but I've been so fully absorbed in everything that you've all been saying. And the Boulder analogy actually is the thing that I've been sort of spinning in my head about what it's not just about pushing in one direction, but it's understanding all of the things that are not active and passive voice, that are broken around you and that have been broken around you, and how to continuously learn and unlearn at the same time, and how to pull all of these facilities together. The thing that has intrigued me most about doing this panel is the combination of skill and mindset that each of you bring to feminism, because I think they're all equally important. I realize I'm not answering the question at the moment, so I will get to that. But I mean, really, really personally, and I say this as maybe the oldest one on the panel here, and I wear that like actually as a badge of pride. I'm very happy about talking about menopause and aging. I wish that I earlier on in my own path of feminism saw the value of certain skills and facilities that I didn't, I think, view as important enough, like storytelling. Not my own storytelling, but drawing the stories of others out and knowing how and where and when they should be elevated. I think the stories are one of the most, as we talk about the abortion context right now, I think one of the things that's been really riveting to me as both a consumer of media and somebody who participates in media is how we actually, for the first time in my lifetime of watching an abortion debate unfold, do understand that there are myriad stories about abortion and what abortion is and means to people and their families and themselves. And this line, abortion is healthcare, which I've always parroted and said because it was, I don't know, it was the company line. It was what you were supposed to say. I see it now in the stories that are being told, and I think regular people are seeing it too when they hear stories that they themselves can relate to. There's such a sense of I in so much of the activism and probably feminism that I grew up with. So I'm babbling through an answer here because it's not actually fully constructed, but that's my reaction to everything you've all been saying and how I've processed what I'm learning here tonight. But it's the boulder and picturing not just a person or a group of people pushing a boulder up the hill, but understanding what all of those shattered rocks now mean to all of us and the activism we practice. And journalism is a form of activism to some extent, perhaps not key reporting journalism, but certainly the kind of journalism that I've gotten to participate in through Ms., which we always call movement journalism or feminist journalism, and it's certainly a form of storytelling. So that was my winding answer. Did I get at anything? Yes. Hard to tell sometimes. Go for it.
I'd love to just respond to that.
Yeah.
Or build, actually. I'm not even responding. I'm building a little bit. It's an interesting thing to think about the utility of storytelling, especially as it relates to feminism and inspiring one to action. Because I think about, as a researcher, it's like I love qualitative data, which is what storytelling is to me. It forces you to engage with not just your brain. It makes you sort of feel in other parts of your body. And I hope sometimes that it compels one to act differently, to behave differently, but I'm not so sure all the time. I'm wondering a little bit about what, I love that people are inspired by stories, but I wonder a lot about what it inspires them to do, And I think that at this moment, we're in the do part. It's the imperative,
I want to build on that. So can I build on that with a question back for everybody, and I'll answer it too. Again, I don't mean to keep sort of buttonholing us because we have jobs, because I know that our practices go wider, but we actually represent sort of four such key pillars to what moves not just social change, but full-on societal change. What does that look like for each of us? What makes us wake up in the morning and say, this is why what I'm doing is going to lead to the next era that we hope is better for all of us and the generation that follows us? That's not a question we prepared. I'll start, and I don't really actually, again, it's not a trick. I didn't plan it just so I could have an answer to it.
If you did, that would have been brilliant.
I know. It would have. I guess it maybe just goes back to how I just answered Joanne, is that I think I want to invest myself more fully in the storytelling aspect and bring that to the work that we do at Ms. every day. And I would actually be remiss if I didn't point out that there's lots of Ms. leadership, Ms. Magazine leadership here in the room right now, who I might ask also to pass the mic to and join in some of the answering. So Camille Hahn, who's the managing editor of the magazine, and was a huge force in curating the book that is available to folks, and she's also, I'm sure, be thrilled to talk about that. And Carmen Rios, who is the leading digital.